Today on the Ferment Station, let's welcome all the new homebrewers. We're going to try to give you all the information you need to get started in the magical hobby of homebrewing. I'm Brian.
I'm Derica.
And this is the Ferment Station, the podcast for City Steading brews. And today we're talking about getting started in homebrew.
So probably one of the first things you want to think about is, what the heck do you buy?
Well, here's the thing. There's a lot of stuff to buy, but you don't have to have everything to get started. And by the way, if anyone is actually watching this, like on YouTube, yes, we changed our studio look again. Because we can't make up our mind. The new house is a little bit unique, and we're trying to find an interesting setup for the podcast. So if you like this, let us know in the comments below.
So we got out the big comfy chairs that are a little too big.
They're actually recliners.
My feet can't even touch the floor.
That's hysterical.
It is okay because we're trying to make this be more inviting, more homey
We
feeling.
just need like a fireplace behind us.
Yeah.
Maybe we can do this out by the fire pit.
That'd be pretty cool.
The fireside podcast. I don't know. It's got a good ring to it, though.
Anywho, we are going to talk now. We started off with what to buy, and we haven't really gotten very far with that topic.
We didn't get very far because I interjected.
That's okay.
What to buy? I mean, the very basics that you're going to need are a fermenter, which really, to use a fermenter properly, I'd prefer to see a beginner using glass, or, I mean, they're plastic buckets, like the 2-gallon buckets. They're okay too, but I'd rather see you use glass. And here's why. It serves dual purposes. If you get a plastic bucket, you can ferment in it, but I wouldn't want to store for conditioning or secondary phase in a plastic bucket. That's a personal preference. Some people will say there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, and I have a lot of trouble finding evidence to the contrary, but it's just a feeling of mine, okay?
There is a higher risk of contamination when you're utilizing a plastic bucket versus a glass vessel. And that's simply because the material that you're dealing with, the glass is not permeable. So there's not going to...
less permeable.
True. Thank you for corrections. Scratches aren't really going to be a thing so much. Little nooks and crannies, those beasties get in there, really isn't going to be a problem. Whereas a plastic bucket, you have a higher risk of potential, and I'm putting strong on potential, contamination or something leaching into the plastic that you don't want.
Exactly. Or leaching out of the plastic. That's always been my major concern because plastic does share a lot of properties with fat or lipids. So because of that, it can actually be soluble and dissolve into a liquid if it's got enough of a solvent type atmosphere, like alcohol.
Yep.
Can be a solvent. But anyway, that's the downsides of plastic. Other than that, plastic is actually great for primary fermentation. We use it all the time. But the reason I say glass is because you have to buy less things, okay? If you buy a 1-gallon glass fermenter, you can use it for primary fermentation, but you can also rack to a pitcher, rack back into that same glass fermenter, and that way you only have to have one. Obviously, it's not ideal because you're taking a double risk by racking twice, but short of having to buy more equipment, that is one way to do it. Now, you can always just buy 2 fermenters. And a lot of the time, like even the North Mountain Supply ones, they come in 2s. So that's probably not as big of a deal as I'm making it out to be, but it's just something to be aware of.
There is a neat trick that you can do when utilizing the fermentation vessels available to you, is that some of them can be readily found just at the store. For example, 1-gallon jugs of apple juice
and wine
can be purchased at a store, and they're perfectly fine to use in the home kitchen or home brewing environment. Same with 2-gallon buckets. We found those.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. You can get those, some bakeries, they get frosting and things like that in them. Just make sure it's a food grade bucket.
Absolutely.
If food came in it, it's food grade. That's the trick. So that's really the important thing when it comes to plastic. Now, if you buy a pre-made fermenter, whether it's a bucket or a glass fermenter, a lot of time they'll come with a lid, stopper, and airlock. If they don't, the glass ones are really easy. You just get a bung and airlock. The lids, sometimes you have to punch a hole in there and put a grommet. It's not that big of a deal, but it is something to be aware of if you're not handy at all and you don't want to be bothered with such things. So that's where maybe buying the specific item that's made for brewing might be a little easier if you're not a DIY kind of person.
There's also many different places that you can go to find these particular items to help you out, like a homebrew shop or Amazon or
a local homebrew shop or Amazon are really the two main ones that you're going
Sure.
to find airlocks and things specific to brewing. Buckets and stuff like that, some people have gotten them at Home Depot and Lowe's and various grocery stores. There's a bunch of big box type stores that you can get these things at. It's just you won't find the specialized items like airlocks, which an airlock is super important. Don't think that you can get away with just doing the cap trick, okay? If you're only going to make one brew to find out if you like it or not, like to find out if you like the hobby, okay, I can appreciate that. And everybody started somewhere. There's nothing wrong with it. But once you've gotten past your first one, if you think you're going to do more, really invest in some airlocks. They're not expensive. Depending on where you live, sometimes they could be several dollars, but still, you're going to use them for years. So to me, it's just a great investment. It ensures that bugs and contaminants don't get into your brew. Super important thing to have happen, because with the lid trick, things can happen. You know, I've heard of it happening. Either it can seal up and explode, or bugs can still get in.
So that's just fermenters, right? So there is so much more beyond that.
The basics, though, the things that you absolutely need, I'm going to say an auto siphon. You need a way to move that liquid around from one vessel to another, because pouring it is not a great idea. You can introduce oxygen. You can have oxidation problems. Not a great way to go. So an auto siphon, a definite, you want to have that.
Next up, I would say would be a hydrometer, a graduated cylinder, and a baster.
Yes, most definitely. All those things are very important. The baster for taking samples, the hydrometer to know what your brew is doing. Too many times people say, oh, I don't need to know how much alcohol I made. That's not what it's about. We actually did a whole podcast just on that.
Yep.
But you know, we've actually skipped over something that's probably the most important thing that you need to buy when you're getting started, and that is a sanitizer.
Absolutely.
We probably should have said that first, because in our heads, the thing is, we are so used to doing this, we do it all the time, that it's a habit. You break out the turbos, which is just a big bucket, and you fill it with water, and we put in the Star San. We almost take it for granted, but it shouldn't be taken for granted. Sanitation is very important. It's going to prevent infections. Now, most infections are really a wild yeast or other microbe of that type that can cause some off flavors or weirdness. Sometimes it works out and is nice. Most times, though, not so much. So you want to be careful and make sure that you're sanitizing properly. And that, for us, Star San is pretty much the sanitizer of choice. I mean, It's used by most people in the industry and most homebrewers. If you can get it, I highly recommend it, even if you have to get it from Amazon. It's really not that expensive. We mix up a batch of it for every brew day, which for us is a recording day, and we use it throughout the whole day, and we dump it out when we're done. Some people like to put it in bottles and use it to spray. Supposedly that's fine, and it's probably better than nothing. But I still don't feel that after a long time it's going to be as good. People will argue with me on that, but you know what? Better safe than sorry. We've never had an infection, so our method must be fully functional and useful. That's the best I got. I mean, that sounded a little awkward, but
okay.
But it's okay. I think you know what I mean.
Basically, what he's trying to say is make sure you use proper sanitation practices so that way you don't risk anything that you don't want to happen.
Yeah, I mean, everything that touches your brew should be sanitized. And that includes like the fermenters, the airlocks, the tubing, the auto siphon, the hydrometer, the testing equipment, your hands. No, we don't sanitize the towel that is on the table. And that's because, well, how do you sanitize a towel first? You could dunk it in sanitizer and wring it out, but that's just weird. Instead, we let it self-sanitize, because everything that we're doing, it gets dripped on it all the time. So it's constantly getting sanitizer dripped on it. It's totally fine. There's nothing to worry about there. For gear, I think, well, no, that's almost it. Next up is bottles. You need something to store it. Now, bottles is one way that you can reuse and recycle things, like old wine bottles, whiskey bottles, things like that. We've used those for years before we actually started getting, the real professional style bottles. And honestly, there's not a lot of difference. But the best bottles we ever got came from Aldi.
Yes.
We got bottles with free lemonade, is the way I used to say it. They were $2 when we first started getting them. They went up to $3. I heard somebody say that they're almost $4 now.
Yeah.
But I would like to say those bottles, if you look on eBay, I think it was eBay I saw them, they were selling for anywhere from $25 to $50 a piece. It is a swing top bottle. It's just wonderful. And I know it's that exact bottle because there's like French lettering on it. It comes with pink and yellow lemonade. Yep. That's what they were. And the lemonade was actually pretty good too.
Yep.
But those bottles, we haven't seen them in a while. Yeah, we haven't seen them in quite a while.
Yeah.
But they are available seasonally through Aldi. They were great. If you can't get those, whiskey bottles work great. Any wine bottle that you can get, basically any liquor bottle that you can get your hands on is going to work just fine. So ask your friends that drink a lot of wine if you can have their bottles, and there you go.
Basically, what you're focusing on is the cap situation. Mm-hmm. So swing tops are great because they're going to lock in place. Also, screw tops work well as long as they have a good seal. Yep. And you really want to focus on the interior of your cap. If it has a nice, spongy,
or sometimes they'll have like a rubber seal or a plasticky seal in there.
Something that's going to compress and create a seal, that is what you're looking for.
Yeah. Reusing corked bottles. This is where it gets a little bit tricky. You do not want to use the cork that it came with. Like a lot of whiskey bottles come with a cork that you can pop off and has a really cool lid on it. They don't seem to work as well once it's been emptied and cleaned and reused.
Yeah,
you might get one use out of it, but that's about it.
Particularly if you store them corked in the bottle, moisture is going to build up in there and you're going to have a mold situation. And you really want to avoid that.
Now, you can get new corks and use a corker, and you can cork them yourself, and that's another way to go. If I was starting out right now, I think I'd go for screw tops.
Yep.
The ones that we can get from Amazon are just great. I mean, they're not expensive. 750 ml bottles. I think they come in like sets of 8 or 12 with a top on them. And wow, we've been using the same caps for years.
Yeah.
You know, when we're done with a bottle, we empty it out, clean it out, re-sanitize, and reuse the bottle. No problem. Trying to think if there's any other gear that you might want. I mean, you know, there's tons of little things that you can get, like pH strips if you wanted to, or a pH meter if you want to. I don't see them as completely necessary. A probe thermometer if you're getting into beer making, or if you plan on heating things, like if you're making bocets, stuff like that might be nice. But that's the real basics of it is, you know, a fermenter, an airlock, a way to measure your specific gravity in a hydrometer, or a refractometer. Those work too. There's just more to it. We have a video on that. There's more to a refractometer, and an auto siphon and some bottles, and you're off to the races. I mean, that's really all you need to get started.
Yep.
Plus something to ferment and something to ferment it with. So obviously you need juices or fruits or honey or whatever, and some yeast.
And that's where we go to next, and that is what to make. And there are so many great resources like us on the internet, through blogs, everywhere. You can find
tons of homebrew
recipes. And I really stress that you do some due diligence and research who you're looking at to make sure that you're following a recipe that's going to work for you and be easy to duplicate. Lots of times we've seen, or people get really frustrated because the recipe is either too obtuse or too
lacking
involved
in detail,
or just kind of like not really paying attention to proper procedures. I hate to say it that way, but
they didn't even explain what they're doing.
Right.
I mean, we've seen all sorts of videos, and we try to make all of our videos start to finish fully instructional so that you don't ever have to have watched anything else we did to understand what's going on and be able to do it. That said, not all of our videos are really super beginner friendly, but I would say anything we've made is not like super advanced. But 4 videos actually stand out in my mind as things that could be perfect for a brand new brewer. Let's say you want to make a beer. We do have the simplest beer ever. I forget the exact name of the video, but it'll be linked below. And it's using an extract that every ingredient came from Amazon, I believe. So very easy to get the stuff. And it was super easy to make. And the beer came out tasting really, really nice. Maybe not up to like the perfect elitist craft beer standards, but it was actually really good enough that I drank it all. I mean, it's gone.
We also have the grocery store series.
Right. The grocery store series is what I was going to mention next. And in that, we have a mead, a wine, and a cider. And all three were made with ingredients that all came from the grocery store. Now, the equipment didn't come from the grocery store, but all the ingredients did. But some of that equipment could be found at the grocery store every once in a while.
We did those on purpose to make it really easy and approachable for our viewers, so that way they could easily find something and create a recipe without doing too much research on trying to find the right products.
Now, I want to say something else about those videos. The mead and wine in particular, those are two of my favorite recipes that I've ever made. I mean, they really do work. They really do come out wonderfully nice. Now, here's the trick. There's times that you can swap ingredients and yeasts and things like that. I don't get really into the nitty gritty of different flavors and things from different yeasts. Most of the time, they're so close together that the real differences are really in the alcohol tolerance of it, the temperature range that they work in, things like that, for our experiences and for our purposes, okay? But those recipes in particular use bread yeast, and they use it on purpose. It's because that particular bread yeast, Fleischmann's, has like an 11 to 12% alcohol tolerance, and there's enough sugars to go a little past that in those recipes. They're designed to end sweet without you having to use either chemical stabilizers or pasteurization or fortification or any other means to stop fermentation. They're designed to end sweet. I just had a comment from somebody the other day that was talking about how they did one of our recipes, one of our original mead recipes, and they used a whole different yeast and it ended dry and they couldn't understand why theirs was different. Well, that's why. It's because that yeast has a higher alcohol tolerance than what we had intended for that recipe. Now, that said, a lot of our recipes, you can pretty much mix and match whatever yeast you like, because many of our recipes, we fermented it dry on purpose and then you sweeten to taste. So if that's the case, it doesn't matter if you use a 12%, 15%, 20%, or if it existed, a 40% yeast, because that way you are still only going to ferment as far as the sugars allow it to ferment to. Hopefully that made sense.
And this kind of sneaks into another topic that I feel is worth talking about. And that is, once you find the perfect recipe, you want to follow it.
Oh, as closely as you can. I don't like to pick on people, but this comes up a lot. Someone will say, I followed your recipe exactly, except that I used a different honey. I used 2 pounds more. I made a 1.5 gallon batch instead of a 1 gallon, but I didn't add any more water. Instead, I used apple juice, and it's like all these substitutions. At that point, it's no longer what we made. And the kicker is something will have gone wrong, and they'll ask me what went wrong. How come it didn't work like ours? And the first thing I want to say is, because you didn't make what we made. It's going to be completely different. But you know, I try to be understanding. I was a beginner once too, and I am the same way. If I see that I have something, but I don't have what they're calling for in the recipe, it can't be that different, right? Well, you know what? The thing about brewing is it's part science and part art. So the science part, once you understand that, then you can play with the art part. The art part? It just sounds weird to say it that way, but
sure.
You know what I mean. So that's why following a recipe is super critical in the beginning so that you can understand the fundamentals and the basics of how fermentation works, how to put a recipe together, why they used this rather than that, why they used this ingredient at this time rather than at the beginning. And a lot of recipes, they do explain this. In ours, we tend to talk about it maybe a little too much, but our videos are long on purpose because there's a lot of information in there.
Right. When we produce a video and share a recipe, we not only try to tell you what ingredients to use, but why we're using them in the first place. Because this is really going to help you in the long term.
We don't give you a fish. We teach you to fish. That's exactly the concept that we kind of did this with. Because I remember when we were learning, and there was not a lot of information back then.
Yeah.
It was kind of hard to find anything about brewing. And some of what you did find wasn't all that good. And you know, we ended up following it just because that's what you did. That's what everybody else was doing. So that's how we're going to do it. And over time, we learned that not everything that we were taught was the right way. So we try to correct ourselves whenever we can. And it's a learning experience constantly. Even after all these years of doing it, we still learn. And we still learn from you guys, the viewers.
Absolutely.
With the questions. And sometimes somebody will ask a question and I just go, well, And it makes me think about something, and then I go and I research it, and wow, that can be a complete game-changing experience depending on what the question was and what it was about. But yeah, I think I'm getting a little off track here.
That's all right. Another thing that I want to talk about now that is kind of a cautionary tale is time and time again, we've heard people say, oh, it's my first time brewing and I'm going to do 5 gallons
or 20 gallons.
Yeah.
Had somebody do that. My first time ever brewing anything, I'm going to make 20 gallons.
And we're just like,
why?
I mean, I'm super excited for you and your enthusiasm, and that's really cool. But the learning process is just that. It's a learning process. And so we don't want you to be set up for failure. We want to make sure that you have a really happy brewing environment. So that way you're not, I hate to say it, but wasting product. Not.
Now, there's kind of two sides to this. There are many people who promote the idea of starting with 5-gallon batches. And their reasoning is it doesn't cost that much more. Now, it doesn't cost that much more in product. Like, obviously, if you're going to make 5 gallons of mead versus 1 gallon of mead, and you're going to use 3 pounds of honey in 1 gallon, now you need 15 pounds of that honey. So the cost is 5 times higher.
Yeah.
Okay, it just is. But some of the other things, it's not as big of a difference. But where the biggest difference is in the equipment. A 5-gallon fermenter is going to cost a lot more than a 1-gallon fermenter. You need more tubing for your autosiphon. You need a different kind of autosiphon. There's a lot of little things that add up that I don't recommend making 5 gallons for your first batch. What I recommend 5 gallons is make 1-gallon batches until you find something that, wow, that was just awesome. I love that. Now you make 5 gallons of that.
Yep.
That's the best way to go. Use the 1 gallons as like experimentation. We get asked a lot why we don't make larger batches. And well, here's the truth. 2 reasons. 1, it's a lot easier to show on camera a 1-gallon batch being moved around and utilized and everything like that than a 5-gallon. And 2, there's 2 of us living in this house that are the drinkers, okay, that will drink the stuff that we make. We make 45 to 50 brews a year at an average of 4 bottles per brew. That is like 160 to 180 bottles a year. That is about a quarter of a bottle each per day, which some days we do more than that. Some days we do less than that. And I do enjoy whiskey, and Derica does enjoy several other kinds of things like gin and vodka and stuff like that. So we don't always drink the brews we make, but it's a lot still with only 45 to 50 1-gallon batches. If we started making 5-gallon batches of everything, now we would have 600 bottles a year being made. We just don't need that much. So that's a major reason why we don't do larger than 1-gallon batches, even for things we know we're going to like, or even for things we do like. And people always ask too, what brews do you make off camera over again because you liked them so much? At this point, almost none.
Yeah.
We really don't brew off camera anymore. Everything is all on camera. Funny thing is, even sometimes like when I'm bottling and stuff, I'm talking as if I'm on camera. I don't know why. It's just a funny thing that starts to happen when you've been on camera so long.
So we did the volume. We've already talked about following a recipe.
Yeah.
So
are we at the end?
We might be at the end. I feel like we're missing so much.
Wow. That just seemed to fly by. But I'm just trying to think of any other little bits of advice that I can give the new brewer. Oh, the number one thing that you need to have if you're going to do this is patience. If you cannot just let something sit without screwing with it, without touching it, without playing with it, well, here's my best advice as a new brewer. Make a brew using a recipe the best way you know how. Do everything you can as close as the instructions say to do, okay? And when you get the urge to mess with it, to do something, to take a reading, to rack it, to whatever, and it's not time yet, make another brew. Seriously, Find another recipe, make another one. If you do that every 4 or 5 days or so, we know a lot of people that have done this too. Within a month, you'll have 6 or 7 brews going, but you'll have learned something from each one.
Absolutely.
And they'll all be in different levels and grades of proficiency, you might say. but you will learn what works, what doesn't, and you will not have screwed up a brew by messing with it too much. Because the number one way to mess up a brew is to rack it too soon.
Yep.
You will probably kill your yeast or cause some off flavors or other things. You might even oxidize it. There's so many people do this, and I blame old recipes for this. So many recipes, especially for wine and older mead recipes, say start the fermentation and in 7 days rack it. Okay, 7 days in what environment? Because they didn't tell you what temperature you should ferment at. Because if you're doing this in Canada, you're going to get a very different situation than if you're doing it in, say, Florida. So 7 days is not accurate. Use the readings. And this is why we stress using specific gravity so much. Because as a beginner, especially as a beginner, if you run into problems and you say, hey, Bri, I have this problem. I started up a brew, even if you started a recipe that we know, like if it's our recipe. I started up your recipe and I did this thing, and now I'm sitting here and I'm looking at it and it doesn't seem to be doing anything. Okay, the first thing I say is, did you take a reading? And if you didn't take a reading, there's not much more I can do to help other than guess. That's all I can do. But if you took readings and you give me an original gravity reading and you give me a current gravity reading, from there, I can tell you what's going on and what to do next. And it's really that simple. I mean, it's kind of amazing, but we see this in our VIP club all the time, where people, now that they've learned, take readings and they ask a question and they can get an answer from somebody else in the VIP before I can even get to it sometimes. Yeah. Because with that information, we can help. We can guide you, because there's a million variables. And that's why I say use a recipe. And I don't want to get into all the variables, because we've actually done whole podcasts on some of those variables, because it's a concept that needs to be understood in order to understand the basics of fermentation. And when I say the basics, I mean the basics, because I don't consider myself an expert. I don't consider myself as someone that knows everything. But you know what I know how to do? Google foo. I know how to find what I need to know, and I know enough of the information to be able to know what to search for. Plus, I do have about 250,000 people that I can ask when I have a problem and I need an answer. Crowdsourcing, it's a wonderful thing.
I think my final point that I would really like to stress, that I think is the best advice I could give anybody in the homebrewing genre, is to have fun.
Oh, yeah.
To not get impatient. Don't get in your own way. Just enjoy the process. Enjoy the hobby, and don't get too angsty about it. You know, it's such a great hobby, and there's so many different things you can do with it, that just have fun. Enjoy the process.
An old business partner of mine had this saying that he used to say all the time, and it's stuck with me, and I still say it now all the time. If you're not having fun at what you're doing, you should be doing something else. I do have another piece of advice. It goes along with the starting a new brew. Let's say you started a mead that you know is going to take 6 to 8 weeks or longer to get done, but you want something sooner. Make a cider, make a beer. Now those are going to be ready before the mead's even done. And you can have a couple of those going and have something to drink, something to enjoy, something to share with your friends, something to brag about while you're waiting for these longer things to finish up. And I think that probably is the easiest way to feel like you're always immersed in the hobby, that you're always doing something, whether it's making, racking, bottling, or drinking. So that way you have something to do all the time.
I think that's great.
Is there any other questions that anyone has? If you do, leave them in the comments below, and I'll do the best I can to actually answer them. We really do get to as many as I possibly can. I can't say every single one, because every once in a while YouTube deletes stuff. But yeah, I try to get to as much as I can. But as always, guys, thank you so much for listening, and have a great day.
Bye-bye.